What's up, y'all? It's Drewski, and I've teamed up with Mountain Dew to produce a hilarious new basketball podcast called The Dew Zone with Drewski. Learn the backstories of your favorite ballers and celebrities like Jamal Murray.
Did you have like a favorite team? Was it the Raptors at the time or no? Was the Raptors even started around that time?
Come on, bro.
I ain't that old, fam. You talking like I'm 50.
Taylor Rooks, Asia Wilson, and many more. You won't want to miss this. Listen to The Dew Zone with Drewski on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast.
This is Tom Leander, and you're listening to the Timeline Podcast with Mike and Sam. He elevates and detonates.
Welcome to the Timeline of Phoenix Suns podcast. My name is Mike. I'm here with Sam, as always. Sam, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Mike. Coming off a loss yesterday.
It's the first time we've recorded after a loss in a while.
and it doesn't bother me that much.
No.
You know, I don't think we plan on talking about it for a long time here, but it's just one of those weeks. You know, when you win 17 out of 20 games, I think you're entitled to drop a couple of games every once in a while. So as long as it doesn't become a pattern, I think we're still looking pretty good here, second place in the Western Conference.
I do think just from a playoffs looking forward perspective, Indiana poses a lot of the problems that the Lakers will for the Suns if they ever do match up against the Lakers in the playoffs, where they just have they have multiple front court players that are big, and then they have other offensive players that are still excellent beyond that. So where the Pacers have better guard play, I would say with Brogdon. Mm-hmm. You know, obviously LeBron is the guy that's the difference in the Lakers. I just think matchup wise, the Suns are still struggling, I think, against teams that are a little bit bigger. You know, they killed on the offensive boards. I think it sort of evened out by the end of the game, but was a little too late by that point. Still an interesting game and still things to talk about, I think, for going forward.
Yeah, look, Indiana played a tremendous defensive game. The reality for the Suns right now is we rely on Devin Booker and Chris Paul, right? And they shot 11 for 30 combined in that game. You're not going to win too many games when those two guys give you that. But I think mostly it's credit to the Pacers. You look at their entire guard rotation, and it's Karis LeVert, first of all, made his debut, Malcolm Brogdon, Justin Holiday, TJ McConnell, just kind of top down. All of the guys they play at the guard spot are relentless. It's kind of like a rotation of Javon Carter's in a way. And I thought they did just a really good job of throwing the Suns off their game. They're a team to be respected for sure. Yeah,
you can't really survive both Chris Paul and Devin Booker just kind of being not good. And, you know, Devin Booker, as bad as I thought he started the game, I'm still a little concerned. I think there's a chance that his knee is just bothering him a little bit. And 1 for 6 from the three-point line, he can do that and still have an efficient game. Like, we've seen that before. But in this game, it wasn't really the case. He was struggling from that mid-range and missed some shots at the rim. Ended the game 9 for 20, but, 20 shots on 20 points, not ideal for Devin Booker. He can have 35 on 20 shots regularly. So obviously he needs to be a little bit better for them to succeed in that scenario. And Chris Paul, 2 for 10, probably the worst shooting game for him on the Suns so far. And, I want to give credit to the Pacers too for how well they played defensively. That's the type of game where if the Suns could be locked in like that for 48 minutes the way they were locked in, they could beat anyone. And I think the Pacers were locked in a way that they could beat anyone too. For the Pacers, I think they'll be really interesting now that Karis LeVert is back. I'm looking forward to watching them a little bit more. It's a weird thing where you can't judge that team by their record at all because they made a huge trade. They lost one of their best players, and then they just had nobody in that spot for a while. They basically traded for nobody, and now Karis LeVert back, and it could be really interesting.
Yeah, they've had to suffer a decent amount of adversity, too, in general, like Miles Turner breaking his pinky, I think it was, and then coming back like a week later and playing just as well is still something that blows my mind about their season. So even
TJ Warren. No TJ Warren.
Yeah.
Pretty fascinating. They're going to be really interesting. He can score. He's better for them than he ever was for the Suns. So
true.
I'll give him credit there. The main interesting thing, and the main thing that we have to talk about from this game is Dario Saric has now closed 3 out of the last 4 games. He finished the game. In scenarios that I think made sense for him to finish. The question I think for us going forward is how often will it make sense for him to play and close out the game? In the past, I've talked about that Dario Saric could close games depending on the matchup, and I think that may still be the case going forward. At this point, it's just become a really interesting conversation as far as like who the best players for the Suns are. And I think this is credit to James Jones and what he's built. The team is deep enough that you can have different guys close in different scenarios. The question will be, when does Dario Saric close? Or has he played well enough that Monty Williams is sort of forced to close him as much as possible to see how far that can go? Even in this game, where they were significantly outscored, he did his magical thing where somehow while he's on the court, the Suns outscore the other team, even against starters, which he closed the game. I'm not sure how much this is going to stay. I have some thoughts on it, but what did you think about not just this game, but just Dario Saric closing in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think it reflects the conversation we've had in the past about Dario is playing sufficiently well enough. He was averaging like 18 minutes per game going into the All-Star break, and I think I said either last week or the week before that's entirely too little. I would like to see him get up to the 24 to 25 range at a minimum. I think is something he's capable of. Now, I didn't necessarily think, not that I didn't want him to close games, but more that I guess I questioned whether Monty was actually going to go through with it. I thought if he was going to bring Dario's minute totals up, maybe what he was going to do is give us more of those 2 big lineups with Dario power forward and Ayton at center. And to that point, we saw a little bit of that against Indiana, and I thought it was okay. Not spectacular one way or the other. I definitely think you can survive with those lineups. Him closing, a question of should we do it? I think against a lot of matchups it makes sense. A question of will we do it? I think Monty kind of already answered that question too. I forget, and I apologize because I forget which reporter asked this, but one of the reporters asked this after last night's game, and he said, it'll be something we look at sometimes, but my understanding is at this point Monty is pushing back on the idea that it's going to be a regular option for him. I think the idea is still he wants DeAndre Ayton playing those minutes most of the time, and Dario will get his chances. But I guess I just don't expect it to be the go-to from now on.
Yeah, I thought the words he used when he was asked that question were interesting. He said, "I hope that I don't have to do that."
That's interesting. I didn't hear that.
Yeah, I hope that's not the case, or something like to that effect. Basically saying that Ayton needs to play better in order to get those minutes. That's what it sounded like to me, and I think that's
the
fair.
Key takeaway. Yeah,
you have to earn those minutes. You have to earn those minutes. And if look, we're at a point of the season where the sample sizes are large now. Like, we're not dealing with small sample sizes anymore, and the fact that Dario Saric is still currently the best player in net rating in the NBA, who's played actual minutes this season, that matters. That means that when he's on the court, good things happen. If you want to quantify it other ways, you can. You can quantify it other ways. Look at the per 36-minute stats. Dario Saric versus DeAndre Ayton at this point. DeAndre Ayton scoring 16.8 points per 36 minutes. Dario Saric is scoring 22 points per 36 minutes. And this is a scenario where Saric is basically getting 12 minutes less per game than DeAndre Ayton, but on a per minute basis, he's scoring more. He's assisting more. Really, the only cases you can make are the big, being big, the rebounding,
that's what,
and blocks.
That's what it is, and it's
that's where DeAndre Ayton succeeds and surpasses him, and you need that, especially against certain lineups.
And defense continues to be a mystery. Like the eye test usually, I think, would say that DeAndre Ayton is a better defender, but again, like how long?
No.
That's why I was, and that's kind of where I was going. Like, how long can you really continue to say that if the stats say what they are? I think Steve Jones Jr., who runs a fantastic pod with Nikias Dunk at the Dunker Spot, was watching back the Portland game, the other game that happened this week the other day, and he was just shedding some insight. He's a former assistant coach. He's just a go-to Twitter follow of mine for basically anything he has to say about X's and O's, but just kind of picking out little things about Ayton's game that concern him from a defensive standpoint of
right.
Dario tends to start in the right spot, and just those little decisions that he has to make that take a matter of kind of milliseconds of reacting to something. And if you make the wrong reaction, you don't get to a certain spot in time, and a guy blows by you or you miss a backdoor cut or whatever. Just he was noticing that Dario tends to be in the right spot from the get-go more often. And it's really hard. It's really hard for even me as someone without a highly trained level of basketball knowledge, right? Like without an official training, it's often hard to really see that stuff. But
it's something that I pointed out after the Portland game as well. It's essentially, it boils down to DeAndre Ayton's decisions sometimes take a split second longer than Dario Saric's to make, and that comes with experience. Like DeAndre Ayton absolutely can get better defensively at points of his career, but right now Dario Saric is in the right spot more often than not. And
athleticism can only make up for that so much. Something that I think, to an extreme, is proven by a certain Damian Jones. Showed us that earlier this season. A different type of athleticism, but being a leaper won't necessarily save you if you're 3 seconds late. Yes,
at some point you have to contextualize what the stats say. I think it's to an extent, Sam, it's our jobs to kind of do that as well as we possibly can on this podcast. And I think a lot of it has to do, it's not just being in the right spot at the right point in time. I do think a little bit of it is scheme to an extent where Monty does trust DeAndre Ayton to where Dario Saric tends to show on pick and rolls. And for those who don't know what that means he pushes out on the guard and then he drops back to the big as quickly as possible, basically stopping them from shooting behind the screen and running back to it. Monty is more trusting of DeAndre Ayton to switch onto guards. Now, why that's the case, I think does matter. Is it because he trusts Dario Saric to run back to, basically when you're running a pick and roll defense that is essentially showing, so it's like hedging on screens and running back to
you're showing an extra man at the defender. That's the entire point of what you're doing.
Yes, you're juggling two things at once at that point, because there are scenarios when you show where you're forced to switch and you have to recognize that switch quickly. You also have to run back, and when you're running back to the defender or to the offensive player that's rolling to the rim, you have to block the passing lane. You have to ensure that he's not capable of sealing off and getting the ball in front of you. There's multiple things that you have to juggle when you're showing. Whereas a switch, you're switching. Like you have one responsibility at that point, and it's stopping the guy that's in front of you. Ayton is going to be better at switching in most scenarios because he is capable of moving his feet faster, and he's still a large body that makes it harder to shoot. So there is a question of, can DeAndre Ayton do what Dario Saric is doing a little bit better in some scenarios? And to this point, not often do you see him do that. I think that the switching for DeAndre Ayton is by design based on what he's capable of doing right now. And I think for DeAndre Ayton, we've seen it before when he has a limited role on defense, like when he has to just stop Giannis or when he guarded LeBron. We all remember when he did that. He does well. I think when it gets a little bit overly complicated, it's still just a little bit beyond where he is mentally right now. And that matters a lot right now because the Suns are going to the playoffs at some point this season. And when they're in the playoffs, they're going to be against coaches that are going to be game planning around that. So I think for Monty, trying to close the games with Dario Saric now is a test to see if Dario is capable of taking what he's doing against bench players and starters. Like, I don't want to make the point that Dario is only playing against bench players, because he's not. That's really not the case. And seeing if that can translate, even if it's cut in half. Like, even if Dario Saric has like a plus 22 net rating right now, even if that's cut in half, that's still a great team, a great net rating for a player. So if he can translate some of that against starters, I think that's going to matter a lot.
Realistically, that's what it will be, because plus 22 net rating, like over a large sample size of, say, a guy plays 2,000 minutes in a season, would mean he's on the greatest team of all time. And the Suns are good, but they're not that. The second best net rating on the Suns right now is Cameron Johnson. He's at a plus 11, literally half of what Saric is. So as the season progresses, that number for Saric will regress because it's just how statistics work. But if he's still a +5 or a +10, that's a very good player. You
Exactly.
you still gladly take that. And look,
especially against better players, like against
Right.
closing lineups.
And the bottom line here is I don't think it's DeAndre Ayton is playing so poorly that, he's losing games for the Suns. Obviously, it's just Dario Saric has been that good, and we're at a point. If you look around the Western Conference and kind of sniff around the standings, you've got teams like Utah starting to show a little bit of vulnerability. They've lost 5 of their past 9. So maybe for the first time all season, Utah showing that level of vulnerability. Donovan Mitchell continuing to shoot sub 40% from the field in 4 straight games now. They've dropped 3 of 4 in March. But other teams, Denver climbing up the standings. The Lakers we're still waiting on Anthony Davis to come back. The time to strike for the Suns is right now, and they're playing. They're within reach of the number 1 seed. They could potentially get it, but development right now, player development, is the last on my list of things to prioritize in the second half of the season for the Suns. They're all about winning, and when it comes to this conversation, that just means the better guy earns the rightful amount of minutes. So far, that's been Dario.
Yeah, and if you can have home court advantage, that could matter more in the playoffs. Who knows? There might be crowds, significant crowds, by the time the playoffs come. And that would matter. Home court advantage matters. That means winning games right now matters. The Suns are within striking distance of the number 1 seed. That means that they could hold home court for the entire playoffs if they are able to hold on to that for the rest of the season. And that will matter. Especially if you get matched up against Utah at some point. Utah is in a place with higher altitude, which benefits them. They're more used to that. And I should say,
Denver, even, another team that applies for.
Yeah, exactly. And I should say, just with DeAndre Ayton too, I think another place where we need to watch is what Portland did. I thought was kind of fascinating because Portland specifically has really good guard play, and there's a chance that the Suns match up against teams that have really good guard play. Portland can get extremely good if everyone's healthy and plays like they did before they were injured, which for Nurkic, I have a feeling may not be the case, as bad as I feel for saying that, but CJ McCollum, I could see it happening. They were screening DeAndre Ayton over and over and over again. And I thought that was especially interesting because what they're trying to do is force him to make as many decisions as possible in a short period of time. And if you're forcing him to make as many decisions as possible, that's where mistakes can come. And that can happen for everyone, right? It's not just DeAndre Ayton. It's essentially anyone that plays against that. And what the Suns need to do, what DeAndre Ayton needs to do, and what Monty Williams needs to do is find a way to simplify that as much as possible for him right now, because I think the more you complicate it, the more difficult it's going to get for him to stay on the floor. I don't know if that means just playing a more traditional drop coverage like Rudy Gobert and just forcing the guards to fight over those screens as much as possible. I'm not sure that works with like Devin Booker, for example, fighting over those screens. Or as you match up against Damian Lillard again, he's just going to shoot behind that screen every time. Right. That makes it really difficult.
I just don't love that. I think what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to take the Suns defense, which has already been very good. It's a top 10 defense, and talk about ways to perfect it. When sometimes we need to acknowledge that it's still good. Yeah. We're still starting from a place of good. So my concern with something like drop coverage is if you play a bum-ass team, you can run a drop coverage, a team that can't hit a pull-up 3. But go down the line, the list of teams that you could potentially see in the playoffs in the Western Conference in the first round that you can run consistently a drop coverage against, I think is very few. You can maybe experiment with a zone a little bit. They haven't played much zone this year at all.
No.
And it's not something that you could ever use as a primary. I'm just thinking back to our conversation last week about when you were talking about Nick Nurse kind of throwing everything under the sun at teams on that Raptors run to the finals. I kind of think what the approach they're taking with Ayton, really, if you want to simplify it the most, that is switching. Like that's the whole point of switching. Yeah. Is it's impossible to make a mistake if you just have the understanding of, we're just going to switch. But I kind of feel like the approach they're currently taking with him is, for the most part, the right one. And we just have to accept that there are going to be some warts and some learning curves.
I think that's an excellent point, specifically because it's just so different for you and I to have the conversations that we're having now, where we're specifically talking about game planning against playoff teams. And just that conversation is just such a drastically different conversation from where we were at previously.
A year ago, we were just talking about achieving a level of competency. Like the Suns could run a drop coverage all season last year, and in fact they did for much of the season. And Ayton excelled as a rim protector. He dropped his percent allowed within 5 feet of the rim or whatever, that stat that everyone likes to quote, including myself, because it's useful for rim protection. That stat went drastically down. He improved as a rim protector, and like that was enough for the Suns to beat enough of the bad teams or okay teams where they had a competent record. But it's just the things that you can kind of get away with now switch as you talk about game planning for the best offensive players of their generation, many in NBA history.
Yeah. And here's the real truth, too. Obviously, matchups are going to matter more than anything in the playoffs once we get there. And that's why DeAndre Ayton is so vital. The teams that really can hurt you, I think, are like the Clippers can really hurt you in scenarios like that. I think the Nuggets can have scenarios where they do hurt you like that, but you still need DeAndre Ayton on the floor to guard a guy like Jokic. That's where it's going to matter. With the Lakers, you need Ayton to guard guys on the Lakers. So it's nice that the Suns have the flexibility to do that. And I think that's what's important to talk about in this conversation here. Because while Saric is closing in scenarios right now, he can't do it against everyone. And I will say, he's stronger, I think, than a lot of people give him credit for, in that he's capable of guarding the post. But a fully engaged DeAndre Ayton is capable of getting rebounds and stopping guys at the rims in ways that Dario Saric cannot. And that's going to matter at some point long as we can get him fully engaged.
How much does Dario weigh? Like 230, right?
Yeah, more than you would think, yeah.
He weighs 225 according to his basketball reference page. That feels like a little bit less.
I don't believe that, yeah.
I don't know, but the point is, there's a difference from him starting in a place where he's matched up on Jokic. Jokic gets the ball in the post, and he just has to kind of absorb those hits into the chest. He's very good at that, but it's a little bit different than when Jokic gets a bit of a running start, like if he's at the elbow, and really puts his full weight into a guy like Dario Saric versus a guy like DeAndre Ayton. Jokic is gonna get a lot further, a lot closer to the rim, putting that elbow into Saric. There's just some hits that I don't think he can absorb. Especially, again, we're talking about a guy who's playing 20 minutes per game this year. Asking him to do it 30 to 35, matching up with someone like Jokic consistently, would take so much out of him in terms of also what you can ask him to do on the offensive end. So there are some matchups you need Ayton to bring the physicality, because you can only expect so much from Dario.
Yeah, I mean, that's where the conversation sort of comes back to. The Suns will go where he can take us as much as possible. I credit Monty Williams for trying this. I think it's really important. Statistically, there's a case that Dario Saric should be playing as much minutes as possible, and you got to test that out. You got to test that hypothesis now while you can. And, I'd say for the most part it's worked. I'm not sure that any lineup would have beaten the Pacers in the game against the Pacers, but beyond that, he was a vital part of the previous few wins. So, it's a good test right now. Let's see. It'll be interesting to see if he closes in the next few games. I'm just doing a cursory glance at the next few games. Memphis, Minnesota next week. So
you need see we're chill right now because we just lost one game. But the Suns need to handle business these next few games. Looking ahead a little bit, like if you start dropping games against Minnesota, that's when the alarms are going to start ringing online on Suns Twitter, on Reddit. Everyone's going to be freaking out, especially because I don't know if you've looked ahead at the schedule, Mike, but there are stretches once you get into April.
April's the month.
There's a terrifying stretch. Let me pull it up real quick just so people know what I'm talking about. There's an 8-game stretch in particular in April, which is, here it is. It's San Antonio, Milwaukee, Philly, Boston, Brooklyn, Knicks, Clippers, Jazz. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, you get stretches like that where it's like the easiest team you play is 500, and then you play like 6 teams that are contenders. And it's like, oh my God. So you need to handle business against Minnesota. You're getting a back-to-back against Minnesota at almost full health. We hope Cam Johnson is back soon. I know he's still out tomorrow against Memphis. But you need to handle business this week for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that will be the month where we see most clearly how certain playoff teams will game plan against the Suns. And I don't know that there's any real coaches that were playing in that specific stretch that are the type to sort of hide things from you before a playoff matchup, because a lot of those teams the Suns actually haven't played that many times. So I think we're actually going to see specific game plans. And I think the statistics do actually say that you kind of want DeAndre Ayton to switch right now. So we'll see if that's the type of thing that they attack on a regular basis. It'll be a really interesting. I think for people listening to this, the things that you should watch for is Dario Saric, his movement on defense in multiple actions now, showing what I'm talking about on pick and rolls. But watch what he does after the show. Watch what he does when he's retreating back to his man, because I think that's an important thing to appreciate. How to contextualize the stats, I think, with his net rating. And with DeAndre Ayton, watch how they play him on pick and rolls. See if they experiment with a drop coverage. I think these next 3 games, you could probably experiment with that a little bit more.
The next 3 games, they could sleepwalk through with a drop coverage and win.
Yeah, maybe
Absolutely.
they won't. And if they do switch, watch if they try to put him in multiple actions. These are not the types of teams that will scare you into that. In the future, for playoff teams, you can watch it. But we'll see, because Monty now has a chance to try a few different things, so we have a few games to do that. All right, you had something that we have not done in a while that you want to cover before we get to our fake trades in the last half of this episode. We're going to do a segment that we have not done in a while. It's called Cold Take of the Week.
The cheese is cold.
All right, Sam, I actually don't know exactly what you're going to cover. You briefly told me, but I am not familiar with this story. So I'm looking forward to you breaking it down. Who do you have for Cold Take of the Week this week?
First of all, thank you for the lovely intro. Not much of a story. I just thought it was time to bring back this segment because it's finally come full circle, in a sense. This, for longtime listeners of the pod, this is a segment that we haven't done in a while, and I think there's a couple reasons for that. One, because the Suns used to be really bad, and every week some member of the national media would have a take crapping on Devin Booker. Like, this is when we first started the pod back in 2018, 2019. We were doing this every week. It was like, okay, Nate Duncan had something to say about Devin Booker this week. Ben Golliver
Steiner.
The next week. Yeah, whoever, and we don't do that anymore. Part of that is because self-confidence is a thing. The Suns have had their glow up, so to speak. We've had our collective glow up as a fan base. We're second in the conference now. You can recognize to an extent when you're a bad bitch and kind of let the criticism fall by the wayside. But the other reason is because, you just don't want to constantly be negative and focusing, giving attention to all of the criticism. I did want to call out this one. You heard the intro there for the segment, Cold Take of the Week. It's, of course, Charles Barkley talking about the cheese is cold. And my Cold Take of the Week goes to Charles Barkley for something he said on Inside the NBA this Thursday about the Phoenix Suns, and he was being very complimentary to Chris Paul. He said that Chris Paul, and I'm sure many of you have seen this, it was circulating around Twitter as well, he said Chris Paul should be in the NBA MVP conversation, and he was adamant about it. Cold Take of the Week to Charles Barkley. The reason being, of course, this was a lovely show of support on Barkley's part for the city of Phoenix. And we all respect him for it. But this is what I warned people was coming, that a lot of members of the national media, specifically the ones who don't pay very much attention, were going to kind of overextend themselves a little bit once they noticed that Phoenix was creeping up the standings in how much recognition and credit they give to Chris Paul for the improvement that's happened this year. And to be clear, Chris Paul has been fantastic for the Suns this year. He deserves a ton of credit for the change that he has allowed to happen. He absolutely deserved his All-Star spot. I was adamant about that just a couple weeks ago. I was very happy to see him in the All-Star game. MVP is a step too far, specifically because, and it's not about that I want to deny Chris Paul credit. It's that I don't want to discredit what Devin Booker has done for this team, and the leap that Mikal Bridges has taken, and the job that Dario Saric and DeAndre Ayton are doing, Jay Crowder. There's so many moving pieces here. This is a team. It's a very good team, and the guys currently on this team, numbers 1 through 8, specifically the Suns have 2 worthy all-stars on this team, but the guys number 3 through 8 in the depth chart, I think, are as good and can go toe-to-toe with the similar ranked guys, numbers 3 through 8, on any other team in the league. You start to see a drop-off after that, kind of, those fringe rotation pieces. Some of them have been really good, some of them not so good for the Suns. But those guys, like up until the first couple guys you get off the bench, have just been so good. Chris Paul, 16 points per game, 9 assists per game. He's had a good season. but not quite MVP worthy. And I just don't want to discredit Devin Booker. So all respect to you, Mr. Barkley, Chuck, but cold take of the week, we're bringing it back. And yeah, maybe we'll put the segment to bed again for a little while until we
hopefully we can. Yeah,
come up
hopefully we don't have to bring it out.
Come up with a good opportunity. But you know, what do you think, Mike? I mean, we saw this coming, right?
Yeah.
Like you said you didn't see the segment. I will say,
I didn't.
Chuck literally said, and it just shows you that you have to be wary of listening to these guys too much. They're fun to watch, but Chuck literally said Chris Paul took the Suns from last to where they are. So it's like that kind of made something click in my head, because I was like, these guys do not pay attention. And I've always known this, but like these guys, they pay so little attention to the league, right? That the Phoenix Suns finished in 9th place last season. To Chuck and Shaq and all those guys, that might as well be last. It really affirmed something for me, that it's like, to a lot of these guys, you haven't arrived until, and this is fair, you haven't arrived until you've at least made the playoffs in the first place. You might as well be last if you're in the lottery. And yeah, it's just not true. Like, our job on this podcast as people who watch every game and cover this team every week is just to be like, yeah, we see you, we appreciate the Chris Paul respect and whatever, but like, no, this is actually what's happening with this team. The rest of the guys are really good too.
Yes. I want to say, just to credit you here, not only are you using cold take of the week to call out somebody who's praising the Suns, that person who is praising the Suns is the only player that took the Suns to the finals in the last 30 years. So shout out to you for the balls
the
extra
level of pettiness. But, you know, I think Suns fans know where I'm coming from.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
It's nothing against Chuck. Chuck is a legend.
Well,
anytime I see him respect the Suns, it's nice. It's just like, these guys have the biggest platform of anyone in NBA media, except maybe like Stephen A. Smith or something, you know? So like, I just want him to get it right, and he didn't get it right.
Well, it's
and I know he's not going to
funny.
Listen to this. It's just, it is what it is.
Somebody can forward it to him. I know it's actually kind of funny too, because before the season, we predicted that the waves of coverage will be Chris Paul first, and then they can get to like Devin Booker and Mikal Bridges. It turned out it was Chris Paul first, and then Mikal Bridges, because of how well he started, and then Devin Booker started to get the credit. My next thought was that Dario Saric will be in some stories soon. Of course, the man who first wrote about Dario Saric was Kevin O'Connor, because he watches the Suns. But it's kind of funny that we talked about all that, but TNT, you know, classic TNT is still in that first wave. They don't go beyond that first wave because they don't watch enough to actually go beyond that. So they're still in that first wave. But let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're gonna throw out some fake trades. We're going to do that. I honestly almost can't believe that we're going to do that. And then maybe we'll have time. Maybe we'll have time to cover some of your guys' because I asked for some on Twitter. So we'll be right back.
The economy is made up of real people doing real stuff, and it affects everything, which you obviously know since you're a real person doing real stuff. Marketplace is here to help you get smart about everything beyond the what of the day's business and economic news. We dig into the how and the why with the real people driving our economy. From big tech and interest rates to small businesses and what's happening at the Fed, Marketplace breaks it all down so you don't have to. Listen to Marketplace wherever you get your podcasts.
Everyone's experienced the pain of dropped calls and internet outages, especially working remotely this last year. So here's the question. If you're the telco company, how do you help create better experiences for customers? Simple. ServiceNow digital workflows can help solve network problems faster and provide real-time status updates so customers aren't left in the dark. That's probably why ServiceNow workflows have helped telco companies see an increase in customer satisfaction. But proactive customer communication's only half the battle. With a single view of your back, middle, and front office operations, ServiceNow workflows also eliminate silos, keeping teams more in sync and more productive. With our scalable services, companies assure a better experience for both customers and employees on a single platform, the Now Platform. So how do you help provide a better network experience for customers? With ServiceNow for telecommunications to help streamline network operations. Whatever your business is facing, let's workflow it. ServiceNow.
Okay, before we get into this, Sam, I want to say just a couple things. I want to talk to you about whether or not we think the Suns should and will make a trade. But before I even say that, I want to say for anyone who likes to get angry at fake trades, just stop listening right now. I appreciate you for listening, but this is, I mean, we do a podcast every week. Sometimes we do more than one.
Just tune in next week. Just
tune in, come back next week.
Just come back next week.
We'll cover the rumors if there's rumors at that time. We'll cover those.
If you've made it this far, it still counts as a download if you leave now. And that's
I waited till after the ad break to tell you to stop listening. So buy whatever was just advertised to you. But just, it's just a conversation to have. And I think it's an interesting year to have that conversation because the difference between whether or not they make a trade could be pretty drastic this year in a way that is different than previous years. It could be the difference between a first-round exit or maybe making the NBA Finals. There are scenarios where a trade could be that impactful this season. Difficult to come up with trades for this team. And I think that's where we should start. I personally think the Suns are not going to make a trade. James Jones kind of hinted at that. I honestly just kind of ignore a lot of the things he says, even though he's told us what he's going to... He honestly has told us what he's going to do in the past. Yeah. But I don't think there's a point to saying, yeah, we're looking at trading some of our players right now. It just affects chemistry. So I will say, as a general manager, you should probably just say, no, we're not looking.
The Suns have an open roster spot. I don't know why. Yeah. Right? I think there's a decent chance that they do something. I think the something that they do is likely to be very boring and, not something that we can even, us two, say, have like an emergency podcast about. Right. The Suns brought on a 15th man third center.
It depends. Is that PJ Tucker? We might have to have him.
Well, if it's PJ Tucker or if Aaron Baines still gets bought out, then we'll do an emergency podcast. But yeah, it's like, Damian Jones was bad.
Yeah.
But there wasn't really a reason to waive him if you weren't, I mean, I guess he's getting minutes on the Lakers now, so good for him. But that makes me think something is coming on the horizon. But it's very likely to be something small. What we're going to do for the rest of today is we're going to talk about some of the potential small things, but then we're also going to blow everything out of proportion and come talk about some ridiculous ones too. Just for fun.
I think it's important to have the conversations about maybe some of the realistic ones and maybe some of the kind of insane ones because I don't feel like anyone really has a full read on James Jones so far. And obviously he built the team from where McDonough left it just sort of a pile of ashes, and true to the city's name, he sort of built a phoenix out of that. And right now,
that's going in the 30 for 30 about this team, by the way, if they win a championship. Plus or minus, 5 minutes into the 30 for 30 documentary before they use that metaphor.
Yes, I mean, you see the pun headlines about the Suns, the rising Suns, and stuff like that every single week, it seems like. But how a general manager acts right now, where the team is potentially a contender or good enough to be considered a contender, it's just different than when you're trying to build a good team from scratch, basically. And so I don't know that we have a good read on him, so we're going to cover it all. Now, I don't think they will.
Where's Jeff Bauer?
Yeah.
We don't know.
I don't think they will make a trade. Do you you don't have to spend too much time on this, but do you think they will?
No, I think I answered that a minute ago.
Okay.
I think they will do something, and I think it's going to be probably boring. Yeah,
I think
that's my official answer.
We should feel free to call out Robert Sarver for being as cheap as possible if they do nothing with that open roster spot besides sign a minimum guy after the trade deadline.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt to pick up someone, right?
No.
Even if it's a buyout thing, it doesn't have to be a trade. Why
injuries happen?
Why go into the playoffs with an open roster spot? That doesn't make any sense. But
now, will they make a trade? So there's that. Now the question is, should they? I tend to think that they actually should because there's options to actually do here. And we don't have to get into that really because I think we can get into that as we bring up our trades. I have 2. I kind of have 3. You have 3 fake trades, right? All right, I'm going to let you go first. Throw
all 3
out your
of them?
fake trade. No, let's just do one.
All right,
and
so
we'll go back and forth a little bit.
Well, let me ask you something. Rate My Professor, was that after your time, or is that something that
No,
share?
that probably I'm very familiar with it. I'll say that. I mean, I work. People who don't know, I work at a university. So
do they still have the chili pepper system?
I'm not sure.
Wait, do you have an official page? Can I look it up?
No, I hope not.
All right. Just making sure. Well, anyone who's used Rate My Professor before, Rate My Teacher, I think is a thing they have at the high school level too. You can rate your teacher, your professor on a number of things. And I don't know if they have it anymore, but at least they have the chili pepper system where it's like you look at each teacher's or professor's profile and they've got a certain number of chili peppers next to their name, indicating how hot they are. So I'm going to use that system for my trades here. I've got 3 trades. On a scale of up to 5 chili peppers, I would say trade number 1 is a 1 chili pepper. It's maybe even half a chili pepper. It's very boring. Trade number 2 is like 2 peppers, and then trade number 3 is a 5 out of 5. So where do we want to start? We want
to start. Let's get boring first, and then we'll get more and more exciting. Keep people here to the end.
The most boring thing I could do here, which is like we don't even have to talk about it, is the Suns have a logjam of guards. They've got too many guards. One need that I still think they could address is go out and get just a Damian Jones replacement, but someone who's actually playable. Someone who is insurance behind DeAndre Ayton and can be a physical, imposing presence, can maybe even play next to Dario Saric a little bit in some bench lineups. Maybe he'll play, maybe he won't. But to address that need, I hit up the Orlando Magic and I swapped. By the way, I should say all of these trades were vetted in DMs with a representative from the other team, just a buddy of mine on NBA Twitter in most cases. But so it's not just me, blindly throwing these out. They were vetted by someone representing the other team at least. I hit up the Orlando Magic and I swapped Javon Carter for Khem Birch. That's trade number 1. Not very exciting. But I'm happy to explain. I'm happy to explain my rationale if you want me to quickly. But it's not very exciting.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Can I just try to encapsulate what I think your rationale is? He's better than Damian Jones.
He's better than Damian Jones.
Yeah.
So here's why
I like
it works.
him.
Here's
He's
why
a
it
shot
works.
blocker.
Orlando wants to invest in Mo Bamba, but they've got Khem Birch in front of him right now. Birch is playing like 20 minutes per game this season. He's just a solid backup big. He's a guy who gives you like 10 and 10 per 36. He's just a big body. He's pretty athletic. He can catch lobs. He's not a great offensive player, but he's a good rebounder. He can space the floor out to 15 feet. Just a rotational big, totally playable, better than Damian Jones. You've got a logjam at guard, so swap Javon Carter. I love Javon Carter, but it's like if you just want another big for the playoffs, you could easily do that, and you're not really playing Javon Carter anyway. Very boring trade, but that's trade number 1.
I dig it. I think that's a nice one. That's the type of thing that could happen that goes sort of under the radar, but could matter more down the line, especially for depth. I'll be honest. I think my trades are more sort of trading two for one. It's getting rid of depth to try to get better for the playoffs.
Now that everyone is asleep.
Okay, so I'm gonna throw 2 at you at once here.
Okay,
because they're very similar. It's essentially, and I'm gonna say this. I feel bad for doing this, but when you look at the Suns team and you look at the contracts that they have, the one guy that makes sense to put in all of these fake trades, and I saw it when I asked for some on Twitter, is Javon Carter. And I don't, people who are longtime listeners of this podcast know how I feel, and long time for us is like a year and a half. But people who are longtime listeners of this podcast know how I feel about Javon Carter. I'm a huge fan. But he's not getting minutes at this point, and he has the type of contract that makes him tradable for guys that make, say, around $10 million, which these 2 guys that I'm talking about are. I talked about him last week, PJ Tucker and George Hill. I don't think George Hill is going to get bought out. I think that my suspicion, just based on how it's played out, is PJ Tucker's agent is trying to talk the Houston Rockets into buying him out so that he has more of a choice of a team to go to than if he were traded. So that's how I feel about PJ Tucker, but I still think these 2 guys should be talked about, because what you can do is you can create a trade with Javon Carter and then some other guy. It's a minimum contract that we have, whether that be Langston Galloway, Frank Kaminsky, some other contract in that place can come up to enough to get either PJ Tucker or George Hill. So if you're doing George Hill, you can put Langston in there, right? You're doing guard for guard. If you're doing PJ Tucker, say you put Frank Kaminsky in there. Some people won't like that probably. He's done well, but at some point I just think his minutes are going to go to 0. Say you do that and you switch them for PJ Tucker because then you're getting a big. At this point, what we're talking about with this type of trade is whether or not you think the Suns have the pieces to try to make a deep, deep playoff run, which I do, and you're sort of not letting it come down to chance as far as where these guys go. Do you make the risk to get George Hill? Do you make the risk to get PJ Tucker? And I personally, I'd probably do either one of these. And what I would do is I would try to get George Hill, and I would hope and cross my fingers and do as many backdoor dealings as possible to try and get PJ Tucker to be bought out, and then see if he's willing to do a BAE, which I don't think he would. But if you can get PJ Tucker for 2 years, which you potentially could do,
I bet he would.
I don't know. He seems like he wants to make more money. He likes to play on good teams.
PJ I'm in a weird place with him because I respect the hell out of PJ's game, and I obviously am nostalgic about the way he played in Phoenix in his first stint. The way he's talking a little bit, though, I think, he kind of has to understand that he gets to choose between playing for a contending team right now or making a good amount of money and playing a lot of minutes. And he's not good enough anymore to get both of those things.
Yeah,
he's just not that player.
And for those who don't know, he sat out a game basically, and the coach Silas said that they expected him to play, and then he didn't. And it comes down to him and his agent have been feuding essentially almost publicly with the Houston Rockets since before the season began because they refused to extend him. And then when James Harden was traded, he asked to be traded to a contender, and they did not trade him. They've kept him on the team. The Rockets are bad, like possibly worst team in the NBA. Bad.
And PJ has been bad. I mean, not offensively. Let me pull up the stats real quick just to demonstrate. I mean, he's never been a guy who takes a lot of shots, right? He just sits in his corner and does what he does. But this year, he's shooting 37% from the field, 31% from three.
Yeah.
It's just bad. Those are like,
and there's a question of how hard is he trying for a team that he doesn't want to be on. Yeah.
For sure. But it doesn't take away from the main premise that I have, which is I think the only way PJ gets 30 minutes per game anymore is if he plays for a bad team. And if he wants to win, he's got to suck up being like a 10-minute per game guy, because I think that's just what he is now. The man is 35, almost 36 years old. Father time comes for everyone.
I think you're probably right, at especially in the regular season, but I think there's a chance that PJ Tucker in the playoffs all of a sudden is getting 25 to 30 minutes in a specific series because of the value that he can bring just sort of across the board and guarding different players at different positions. Yes, not as good as he was previously, but those are the types of guys on the fringes that make you a title contender. Not the most important players on your team, but the guys at the ends that are still very good in the playoffs. So he's there. George Hill, we talked about him. We don't have to break it down entirely here. But with George Hill, he can play with multiple players. He's a great option there. There are other guards that we can talk about once we get to other people's options there. I'm still sold on George Hill. Not a lot of statistical evidence to say that he's great, but not a lot of statistical evidence to say that he's bad, and the playoff experience is enough for me there. So let's not stick on that one any longer. You got another one. The 2 peppers one or the 3 peppers one.
This is more like a 1.5 peppers. It's still not. It's on the same level of what you were just saying. It's the idea is, so the first thing that I addressed, we don't have to talk about anymore. The second need I'm addressing now is the same thing you're doing with George Hill. We've got a plethora of backup guards. Get me a guard I can trust. Get me a guard who gets buckets. That's what I want. I want a guy who gets buckets for the playoffs, because Cam Payne, I'd love to believe that he can sustain what he's currently doing, but in my heart of hearts, I'm not 100% there. And Galloway, Moore, like Etuan Moore getting minutes right now he's just not cutting it. So I'm going to go get an upgrade. I'm going to call up Indiana, and I already vetted this one as well. I'm swapping Javon Carter, Etuan Moore, and a future second-round pick for Jeremy Lamb, who's on a 2-year deal, including this year, for about $10 million a year. The reason Indiana does it is because they need to re-sign guys like TJ McConnell at the end of the offseason. Etuan Moore comes off the books almost immediately, so they're going to save about $6 or $7 million in cap this summer if they do this trade. And because they're not playing Jeremy Lamb in position that much, they're playing him more at small forward. They've even played some Jeremy Lamb at power forward this year when he's a 6'5", very much a shooting guard. His averages this year, 11 points, 3.6 rebounds, 1.5 assists per game, 46% from the field, 44% from three, 94% from the free throw line. This is a guy who he was a starting shooting guard for Charlotte just 2 years ago. He averaged 15 points per game in Charlotte for a couple of years. Not a ton of playoff experience, because he's one of those 27, 28-year-old guys who's just played for mostly mediocre teams, but I trust him. That's really the biggest thing here. Just a guy who you can trust to kind of really, I guess the best way I could describe it is he's just Etuan Moore, but better at everything. The defense, I would say, is just as mediocre to bad as Etuan Moore. But the offense, he's much more comfortable on ball. He can go and snake the pick and roll, same as Booker and Paul. He can hit pull-up threes in addition to just being a spot-up threat. He can get inside, finish with the floater. He's just a guy you can trust to score. And specifically, the thing that excites me about a deal like this, again, it's not a super sexy move, but it's like, I think you could settle on an 8-man rotation in the playoffs. If Cam Payne isn't cutting it and at any point he regresses, I think you could scale back your rotation to 8 guys and just be like, okay, the only 3 guards we're going to play in the playoffs, Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and Jeremy Lamb. And Booker slides over to almost become your backup point guard. And it's like Booker and Paul play like 35 minutes. Lamb plays like 25. You pull Chris Paul a few minutes into the game in the starting lineup, like 6 minutes into the game or whatever. Booker slides over to become the point guard. Jeremy Lamb comes in as your shooting guard. And any time, you're playing more point book this way, obviously, but at any point in the game, you're always guaranteed to have 2 self-creators in the backcourt. Right now with Etuan Moore, it's just not the case. Even with Cam Payne, arguably sometimes, they just don't have that level of scoring. Jeremy Lamb gives you that, and that's why I'm potentially pulling the trigger on this move.
I love it. Well, I love the fit. I will say, trades always make me scared to say I like them or I don't like them, but I like the fit because I think Jeremy Lamb is the exact type of player that Monty Williams likes in that he's capable of 0.5, basically. It's pass, shoot, dribble, all of that.
His defense might frustrate him a little bit, I'll admit. That's the part that's like, Jeremy Lamb is not a good defender. But I think Etuan Moore was never a good defender either. And if he looked decent in this system, then I would believe that as long as Lamb is a hard worker, I have no reason to believe he's not. I think you'd get the same sort of thing out of him.
There's just a lot higher of a chance that Jeremy Lamb in lineups that have Devin Booker, Dario Saric, and Jeremy Lamb, that he just goes off for 18 points a little more often than Etuan Moore would, which in the regular season matters, and in the playoffs might matter a lot when you have that third guy that's capable of going off for close to 20 points at any point. So I like that one.
And the one I liked about this one too is like, there are certain guards that you could go out and get, but you need to give up Jalen Smith. Keeping Jalen Smith is not a major priority of mine, but if I can go out and get a guy who I feel is a decent option while also retaining Jalen Smith, in this case it worked for Indiana. The guy I was talking to is actually the guy who runs the Blue Wire Pacers podcast. He really just wants some cap relief, and they don't care about Jalen Smith. So I was happy to hear that, and I was just going to be like, all right, we'll keep Jalen, and we'll just consolidate our roster. We'll swap out 2 guards who are not cutting it for a guard who's a little bit better. It's basically common sense.
Yeah, I dig it. Is it time to get spicy?
Yeah, let's get spicy.
Is it time? All right, I've actually thrown this one out, but we've never talked about it. I've thrown this one out as a poll on Twitter, and I would love to hear what you think about this trade and how far you'd be willing to go to get it done.
Is this the Rashawn Holmes one?
No. I love Rashawn Holmes. Marvin Bagley, I'm not a huge fan of. It's Ayton and Jalen Smith for Capella and John Collins. So to the Hawks for Capella and John Collins. And I'll tell you this, I think that the Hawks would say no to this trade just off the bat. But if they said yes, I personally would do this. And for those who don't know, Capella is one of the best defenders in the NBA right now by all metrics. He's capable of doing a lot of the things that DeAndre Ayton does, which I think if you trade DeAndre Ayton, you have to get a guy back that's capable of doing those things. What it does is it gives Chris Paul a partner that has probably a little bit more chemistry with at this point because he played with Clint Capella in the past, and he's still capable of playing great defense, which I think is kind of interesting. It also gets the Suns sort of out of the conversation of what DeAndre Ayton's going to be paid in the future because Capella will be under contract for a few more years. It does get them into the conversation of what do they pay John Collins if John Collins is part of this trade, which I think is a fair conversation. With John Collins, you could get him for this year. You could try to extend him at the end of this year because he's drafted in the same draft class. If you do not extend him, he has his qualifying offer next year. If he takes that qualifying offer, you cannot trade him, but you still have him in restricted free agency after that. And then the Suns can make the decision whether or not they want to keep John Collins, which I kind of like the idea of allowing him to go to restricted free agency and just keeping him on that QO for 2 years. Now, you can give your thoughts on this trade. First of all, John Collins is an excellent offensive player. I know you like him just from conversations we've had in the past. But say they say no. My question to you is, would you slot Cameron Johnson in that Jalen Smith spot to make this trade? Assuming that John Collins is essentially able to replicate what Cameron Johnson is doing offensively, and then you have Capella in that Ayton role. Is that enough for you?
Pataz.
Put you on the spot, huh? Well, first of all, let's talk about it from just this perspective. Ayton, Jalen Smith for Capella, and John.
My brain just broke. Let me think through it a little bit. I think John Collins is a really good player.
Yeah.
But you need kind of a more massive restructuring of what you're doing with this team, right? Because suddenly a lot of the things that you're doing don't make sense. Like, you need more of a plan for... And these may seem like minor things, but it's like when you're so close to being a contender already, you are a contender. And now it's not just you got rid of Ayton and Cam Johnson. But if you acquire John Collins and Clint Capella, suddenly Jay Crowder and Dario Saric don't make much sense on this roster either long term. Like, it feels like one of those guys has to go too. It just feels like you got to move a lot of pieces around if you're going to do that.
I don't know if that's the case. Don't you think that to an extent the Suns have already been struggling with finding the right starting power forward, considering multiple guys have been in that position so far?
Seem like it should be much of an issue to me, but for some reason it evidently still is. Yeah,
well, hey,
I'll give
statistically it is, Sam. Like, at this point, you can point at the net rating stats and say,
true,
nothing has really stood out
you're right,
as the right scenario for this. The other option, the other part that I like about it is we talked about what DeAndre Ayton's role is at this point. It's essentially just an energy guy who's capable of playing good defense. Well, DeAndre Ayton struggles with effort sometimes. If you have an energy guy, you could have Capella, who doesn't really struggle with effort at times. If you're switching out just for this season alone, talking about how good they can be, I like that because you have now a guy who's just sort of used to that energy guy role and is more capable of just giving 110% energy at all times. I like this trade personally, and I would do this trade, especially if it's Ayton and Jalen Smith. I would do it personally.
I feel bad because this is so not fair to John Collins, who's a young player who's still figuring it out. But there is a part of me that feels like John Collins is destined to be one of those really talented 20-point per game scorers who only plays on mediocre teams. And it's not fair for me to say that, but it's like from a pure asset evaluation perspective of which guy has more talent. Because you're banking on, if you're punting on DeAndre Ayton's future value, which you are doing because you're accepting the sure thing in Capella, who's going to give you a walking 15 and 15 every night, you're banking on John Collins.
And he had a 10-block game this season. 10 blocks.
Right. But if you're doing that, Collins has to make up for it by being noticeably better than Cam Johnson and their future projected value.
If you're putting Cameron Johnson in there, which I think is the part of where you talk about it where maybe I wouldn't do it at that point. Yeah.
Well, sure. I mean, if it's Jalen Smith, I'd do it. I'll just say that right now. But John Collins is a better player right now than Cam Johnson, and by all accounts is probably projected to be a better player in the future too. It's just
I'll tell you this,
Johnson's
Sam.
a much better. Cam Johnson is he's featured in many of our best lineups this season. He's a much better defender than we gave him credit for. I don't know if the ceiling is super high, but I just kind of feel like Cam Johnson is playable in the playoffs. You talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
I feel like Cam Johnson is super playable in the playoffs, and I don't know if I feel the same way about John Collins. It's not fair to John Collins because he's played on some trash teams where it's just like him and Trey and bums, and like he hasn't been given a fair shake yet. But his thing right now continues to be defense. Does he provide any defensive value to the Suns of the playoffs right now? I don't think he does.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think there is a chance that you get him, first of all, trying to prove that he can be a capable player on a good team right before his extension negotiations. And then if that goes badly, then he has 1 year to prove what he's worth in free agency, which is kind of a nice scenario to have for a player that's basically just entering his prime. But I think that's a fair thing to say. The real question is, do we want a player that has a history of being suspended for taking banned substances? I think that's the real question there. I'm not sure that we would want that.
Shut up.
It's the P trade. We'll call it the P trade if it does go through. All right, you have one more that I'm sure will piss people off as well. Go ahead.
Awesome. This is the all-in to win trade proposal for me. I've got a couple people on our Twitter feeds, man. Let me tell you, who I know are going to be super excited about this one in particular. This is go and get me a third All-Star. Give me a big three this season, and let's win the damn championship. It's a 3-team trade between Phoenix, Orlando, and Oklahoma City. The Phoenix Suns receive Nikola Vucevic and George Hill. The Thunder receive Jalen Smith and Javon Carter. The Orlando Magic receive DeAndre Ayton, Jay Crowder, Etuan Moore, Darius Miller from the Thunder, and a future Suns first-round pick in 2024. It's the Vucevic trade. And in the process...
Okay, can you just, real quick, because I know that people are listening to this
People
audio,
are already mad.
Can you just describe what is going out for the Suns and what's coming back?
So, the Suns are giving up 5 players and a first-round pick. Those 5 players are DeAndre Ayton, Jay Crowder, Jalen Smith. Those are the 3 pieces that I would say are significant. It's 2 prospects, one really good prospect, one we don't know what Jalen Smith is yet, and Jay Crowder, who's a nice rotational piece. And then you're giving up Javon Carter and Etuan Moore, who are whatever. And not that I don't like them, but just practically speaking, they've been whatever. And a first-round pick. You are getting back Nikola Vucevic and George Hill. Now, before people say anything else, whatever you're screaming at your podcast app right now, let me just say, contextualize. Here's what Nikola Vucevic is doing this season. He is averaging 24.6 points per game, 11.7 rebounds per game, 3.7 assists to only 1.7 turnovers, by the way, which is very, very impressive. A lot of times with these like high usage bigs, you see guys, we saw it with Boogie for years. We see it with Karl Anthony Towns. We continue to see it with Joel Embiid. They get assists, but they also rack up 3, 4, 5 turnovers. Vucevic is not one of those bigs. He also shoots 41% from 3. He's hit more above the break threes than any other player in the NBA, not just center, but he's hit more above the break threes than Steph Curry, and 85% from the free throw line. He also ranks 8th in the NBA in VORP, ahead of Damian Lillard, Kawhi Leonard, and Bradley Beal. That's what you're getting in Nikola Vucevic. You're selling a lot. You're getting rid of a guy who's been important to winning basketball in Jay Crowder. Now you're going to have to shift Cam Johnson into the starting lineup.
Yeah. Then you hope PJ Tucker is bought out at that point.
Right. You're also you're losing, obviously, DeAndre Ayton. You're punting on the future potential of DeAndre Ayton and Jalen Smith. That's a lot of future potential there, and an additional first-round pick. But you also get George Hill back from the Thunder, and that's what makes this a really intriguing idea to me. Because if you're not with me yet, let me just sell you on the idea. Let's say, as you just said, Mike, let's say PJ gets bought out, and the Suns are then able to go scoop up PJ Tucker. If you made this trade, you could have an 8-man rotation. And again, rotations tighten in the playoffs. I'm projecting it's probably going to be 8-man. Maybe it's as many as 9. But you could have an 8-man rotation in the playoffs that looks like a starting lineup of Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and Nikola Vucevic. 3 all-stars and 2 bona fide awesome role players. And then your first 3 guys off the bench are George Hill, a veteran with playoff experience who can bury threes. PJ Tucker, don't have to sell you on PJ Tucker. Even if PJ Tucker doesn't come, I think Abdul Nader, honestly, has proven enough at this point that he could maybe fill that role too. And of course, Dario Saric, who we're talking about as a 6th Man of the Year candidate. You need to hope at that point that no one gets an injury. Obviously, you always need to hope for that. But I think that's giving you just 3 top 30 players in the NBA, and you become an equal favorite, maybe almost, with the Lakers or the Nets or the Bucks for winning the damn thing this year. I really think you do. Let me put it to you this way. Going back to the VORP stat, if the Suns made this trade, they would have 3 of the top 30 players in the NBA in VORP this season. None of those 3 would be Devin Booker. It would be Vucevic, Chris Paul, and Mikal Bridges. Yeah. And then Booker, because he had such a bad first month, doesn't do that well in that stat. He's been climbing up the leaderboards for the past 6 weeks and probably will continue to do so.
That is fascinating and good work, by the way, because that took some work, I can tell you.
Well, and you know, again, I was almost the only other thing I'll say, I vetted it with a Magic person. I was almost surprised because there's part of me, like, Orlando is getting some cap relief in the form of Darius Miller, who's a nobody for OKC, but mostly they're getting Ayton and a future first-round pick and a solid rotational piece in Jay Crowder, which, by the way, I feel very bad for Jay Crowder in this scenario.
And they could flip him.
Yeah, I feel very, very bad for Jay Crowder because he is a good player and he believed in the Suns. but I think this could potentially take you to being a contender. And supposedly, I mean, at least the person I ran this by seems to think that no, that's all the Magic would need, and they'd be willing to move on from Vooch.
It's fascinating. Now, I can tell you there's some people right now in their cars or at home with their headphones on screaming defense
I know.
into their phones.
I know.
What do you think? What's your response to that?
My response to that is that you're right in one sense. I'll concede to you. I think Ayton is a better defender than Vucevic. I'm not willing to concede that Vucevic is a bad defender. I think he is still a good enough defender to win a championship. And the level of offense you have here with, I mean, Vucevic, frankly, Mike, he just takes everything that's good about Dario Saric and maxes it out to the highest possible level.
Right.
In terms of his playmaking, his ability to hit the trailing three, his ability to post up and act as a kind of center of gravity on offense, to me, it's a no-brainer. Like, I think you become competitive with Brooklyn's offense at this point if you go out and get a guy like this, and I think you'd have a better defense than them too.
I think the idea of picturing Devin Booker and Chris Paul with that amount of spacing is very exciting. Now, last question for you. Sorry I didn't prepare you for this one, but contract-wise, there's no way to do this with Cameron Johnson instead of Jay Crowder, I assume, right? Because, and here's why. If we're talking about just building the best possible team for this year, I would prefer Jay Crowder in that starting lineup going into the playoffs because of his defensive versatility. And right now, let me just say this. 3-point percentage, Jay Crowder, 37.6%. 3-point percentage, Cameron Johnson, 37.8%. This is the unbelievable part of that stat. Jay Crowder has shot more 3-point attempts than Cameron Johnson by 20. So, higher volume and basically the same. I know net rating says Cameron Johnson is better, so I think that's on your side as far as playoffs. But we've seen that in the playoffs, when the game changes, Jay Crowder earns minutes. So is there any way to do that?
And there's certainly an element, too, of Jay Crowder is just an experienced veteran, and you don't want to trade guys like that away.
And it makes the Magic more likely to say yes if it's Cameron Johnson, too, I think.
For sure. I don't have the trade machine in front of me, but I believe if you give up... So the other thing about this trade, you keep Campaign. Campaign is still on the roster. He's just not playing in front of George Hill at this point, I think.
Right.
If you were
especially
willing
in the playoffs, but in the regular season, he probably still gets a lot of minutes.
Right. But if you're willing to forego the George Hill thing, then I think, you could make it work where you give up Cam Johnson instead of Jay Crowder, but you can't take back George Hill in addition to giving up just Cam Johnson.
That's interesting.
And again, you're putting me on the spot, so I'd have to run the numbers and make sure that works, but I do believe you can definitely do it with a package of Ayton, Cam Johnson, and then Javon Carter and Jalen Smith. I think those four would roughly work, plus a pick or something for Vucevic. And maybe at that point, it's not even, it could be just a two-team trade. You don't have to involve anyone else at all. The reason I involved OKC was because A, George Hill is a useful role player. I figured we could use that. But B, also because they have a couple of bad contracts. They've got Darius Miller. They've got Trevor Ariza as well. Guys that they can easily kind of just flip and throw someone's way as an easy way of providing cap relief, which the Suns just don't have contracts like that. But I do, to answer your question, I do believe you could do it.
Yeah, I just want to give you credit for how complicated it is to come up with a trade for this team in general. Now, as the varying levels of how realistic these trades are just sort of up to the person who's listening right now, because different people will say different things. But how complicated it is to come up with an interesting trade, for you to come up with a trade that not only gets back an all-star, but George Hill, a rotational piece for a potential championship team, in a way that makes, to me, realistic sense in a lot of ways. Is just bravo. Great work on that. I think that's really complicated and a really fascinating trade. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what people think of that. I personally, I love it. I just think that's the type of all-in move where I think what you're doing in that case too is you're sort of hedging your bets on Chris Paul getting older at some point too, because then you have another all-star that's an offensive creator that does a lot. I mean, and at some point Chris Paul could miss some games. He's going to get older. He might still be amazing, but he might not. He also, there's a chance that Chris Paul does not sign with the Suns next year, does not pick up his option. And a lot of people think he's going to get rid of that option and sign for the Suns for cheaper. He's not. Yeah. If Chris Paul denies his option for next season, it's because he's signing somewhere else for more money. That's what could happen. And that could happen at the end of this season. I'm not saying it will, but at some point you have to prepare for things like that potentially happening. And what we've seen with the Suns is when Devin Booker is really the only offensive creator, the main offensive hub, they're going to struggle. They will. And Chris Paul has been vital to that. And if something happens with him or he leaves, that's a disaster, I think. So you're hedging your bets there, and you're providing a future offensive all-star. That
now,
can
what
be
I will
that
say,
second piece.
Vooch is 30. I will point that out.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Suns fans would be more comfortable with this trade if he was 26 or 27. They'd talk about how it fits the timeline better. But when you're where you are right now, when you're already in a situation where you only have a 2 or 3 year window, you do what you can do to maximize that window. I think you put this guy Vooch, he's a 2-time All-Star now, but he took a big leap. He's been underrated for years, but he took a big leap in the past 2 years. You take a guy with 11 career playoff games to his name, an entire decade in Orlando, and that's the furthest he's gotten.
Right.
I think 30 years old, Vooch realizes that he only has 3 or 4 years left at most of his current play. I think he's going to be motivated. I think he's going to be really motivated at this point because this is his chance. And you've also, let me just look at his contract situation. I think he's got 2 more years after this. He's got one of those interesting declining contracts. So he actually makes $26 million this year, but then it goes down to 24 and then down to 22, which is potentially could save you a little bit of money down the line or assist you in re-signing some key role players. The types of transactions you can't necessarily see yet, but you want to stay 1 or 2 steps ahead of, might be useful to you down the line. He's a great player. He's a really great player.
Yep. Fascinating stuff. And I don't think we talk enough about how Vooch looks like Flula Borg. And I know there's not a lot of people who know who Flula Borg is, but those who do know who Flula Borg is will enjoy that joke. We don't have time to get to all the people who gave me fake trades, but there's some fascinating ones. So I implore people listening to go to my Twitter account if you follow me and find the tweet where I ask people for their fake trades. I'll retweet it tomorrow from the timeline account so people can see it. But there's some really interesting ones in there from Suns fans. If you don't like these trades, I'm going to be honest, I don't really care. We're making up fake trades. None of them probably will happen, but it's just interesting to talk about this at this point of the season. But we do appreciate you for listening. Do you have anything else before we go, Sam?
No, it just echoed your thoughts. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you don't spam that 1-star review button too fast. Actually, if you're a new listener, we've got a decent amount of new listeners. I try to plug this like once every couple months. Feel free to take a gander over to our Apple Podcast page. Leave us a 5-star review. We always appreciate that very much.
Yeah, and we read the reviews. We do.
One of the easiest ways that you can help us if you are a fan of the podcast at this point. And please don't hate us for trading your favorite players away. We got to come up with content every week somehow.
Exactly. This is a weekly thing. 3 games that should be easy this week. Hopefully we'll come back after this week and talk about 3 wins. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back soon.
Tired of lying awake, tossing and turning, just hoping for a few hours of sleep? Get the sleep you crave with the one-of-a-kind Tempur-Pedic. Only Tempur-Pedic uses proprietary Tempur material that continuously adapts and responds to your body to relieve pressure, so you get deep, uninterrupted sleep. All night, every night. The Tempur-Pedic Summer of Sleep starts now with all Tempur-Pedic mattresses on sale and savings up to $500 on adjustable sets. Learn more at TempurPedic.com.